Tonight on Primetime, the US says the toughest sanctions ever imposed on Iran are on the way as Washington escalates pressure over the Strait of Hormuz. But Tehran says it won't bow to what it calls economic terrorism. Good day and welcome to Primetime. I'm James Ezimoha. Now, Washington says it is preparing its toughest ever sanctions against Iran, following President Trump's threat of economic warfare. The move comes as oil prices rise and Tehran disputes U.S. claims over shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Washington will impose what he described as the toughest sanctions in history on Iran. He says maximum economic pressure could reduce the need for further major military action. Speaking to CNBC on Thursday, Bessent said the measures would complement the U.S. naval blockade imposed on Iran in April. He said details of the sanctions package would be announced at a news conference on Monday. The comments followed President Donald Trump's threat of economic warfare against Iran and countries that provide Tehran with any form of support. Trump defended the policy, saying preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons was the central aim of the operation. Oil prices rose to their highest level in more than 3 weeks after the U.S. warnings, as markets assess the impact of the conflict on Middle Eastern oil supplies. Washington says the measures are intended to weaken Iran's government. Tehran, however, has accused the U.S. of spreading misinformation about shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's state news agency IRNA says traffic through the waterway remains limited and is restricted to routes controlled by Tehran. It also accused Washington of trying to ease pressure on global crude prices and U.S. petrol prices ahead of the midterm elections. Meanwhile, Russia's UN ambassador Vasily Nebenzia says Moscow will not pressure Iran to resume negotiations with Washington. He says Tehran should decide its own course as a sovereign state.
Now, Iran has condemned what it calls the escalation of U.S. economic and trade sanctions, vowing to stand firm in defending its interests. Turaj Shivalulu reports from Tehran.
Iran's foreign ministry has condemned the latest U.S. economic and trade sanctions against Tehran, describing the measures as economic terrorism and crimes against humanity. In a statement, the ministry said Iran remains determined to protect its national security and interests, despite what it called continued U.S. military, economic, political, and psychological pressure. Tehran also linked the new sanctions to the anniversary of the 1953 CIA-backed coup in Iran, saying they reflect decades of hostility by successive U.S. administrations. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi separately criticized the measures on X, responding to U.S. President Donald Trump's description of the sanctions as an economic D-Day. Araghchi said Washington's continued reliance on what he called failed pressure policies would only lead to further defeat and deepen tensions with the Iranian people. He also warned that U.S. economic measures against Iran threaten the global economy and national sovereignty worldwide. Turaj Shivalulu from Tehran for A News.
Now let's talk to John Kavulik, senior editor at Issue Insight, joining us from New York, USA. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, now, Trump is calling this an economic D-Day for Iran. What is Washington actually trying to achieve? Is it economic collapse, political pressure, or a return to negotiations?
I think it's probably all three. The question is in what order. The White House wants Iran to be subjugated. But in addition, in order for D-Day to work, all of the countries that engage with Iran, the 7 countries that have borders with Iran, the 9 countries that are within sharing water with Iran, they would have to subjugate themselves to the White House as well. I don't know if they're going to do that. The most recent example that the Trump administration looks to is Cuba and the last 8 months of Cuba. January the 3rd, the armed forces of the U.S. go into Venezuela. They abduct and extract the president of Venezuela. That immediately resulted in Venezuela ceasing its support for Cuba, oil, funds, etc. And because Cuba was an island, that along with the U.S. introducing secondary sanctions, which is going to be a big part of what Secretary Bessent outlines on Monday. So the secondary sanctions were, first, we're going to designate Cuban ministries, Cuban government companies, Cuban joint ventures, and we're going to say that any foreign company dealing with those, you're now subject to our sanctions. So what happened? Within 30 to 40 days, foreign companies left Cuba. All the hotel companies left Cuba. The mining companies left Cuba. The banks left Cuba because no one wanted to touch Cuba because Cuba wasn't worth it. Now we get to Iran, and what is the Trump administration trying to do there? They're sort of trying to do the same thing. The problem is that Iran has 93 million people. That's a big marketplace. And it's going to be very, very difficult for governments to shut off not only their land borders, but their vessel borders and cut off completely all trade with Iran. I think this is going to be a challenge for the administration to corral. In D-Day, it was about 15 countries. Here, Iran has a universe of 16, and then you've got everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Now, George, what would tell us that this campaign is actually working? Is it falling oil revenues, rising prices inside Iran, or pressure on the government itself?
Well, again, I'm not ducking, but I think it's a combination of all three. President Trump has already teed up, particularly to the U.S. electorate, particularly with the midterm elections coming up in November. He said a week ago at a speech, it's okay if you're going to have to pay a teeny bit more for your gasoline because it's worth it to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Now, in the past year, the price of gasoline at the pump, the gallon has gone from $3 to $4. That's a 37% increase. That's not a teeny bit more, even for a billionaire like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. That's still a huge percentage. So I think President Trump is going to say, we expect oil prices to go up, but that's okay because it's for the greater good. He's then going to say that countries, the Gulf countries particularly, and countries like Azerbaijan, Turkey, Armenia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that all have borders with Iran, you're going to need to make certain that no products go into Iran, no cell phones, no vehicles, no anything, and make sure nothing comes out of Iran. Smuggling, getting around sanctions has been done for millennium. It just happens. It's going to be hard for the president to force countries in the region to adopt these secondary sanctions. And then lastly, and I think this is going to be the biggest challenge for the president, countries in the region, Azerbaijan has a border with Iran. That border isn't going to move whether Iran has a nuclear weapon or not, whether the Strait of Hormuz is open or not. And so countries are going to be looking, saying, okay, President Trump is focusing on what he wants to happen today. We're going to have to still live here. We're going to still have to have bilateral and multilateral relations, not only with Iran, but with everybody else. So they're looking past President Trump, where President Trump is looking for this, this excitement, this moment. But I just don't don't think it's going to go well for him. We've already seen him in the past with Russia sanctions, where they'll put sanctions and then they'll back off on China or India if they're purchasing a lot of oil and natural gas and fuel. So I think this is going to get jumbled very, very quickly.
Now, in your recent article, you argue that Iran's geography, as you've already touched upon, and its links with neighboring economies make it very hard to suffocate. Looking at this new pressure campaign, how much does that still hold?
I think it holds because there's always going to be seepage. The question is for the Iranian government, is the seepage enough to keep the Iranian government in power, to keep the Iranian population from protesting? Cuba, again, is somewhat of an example there, where the reason that the U.S. has all of these sanctions on Cuba in this year, all the new ones, has been to get Cuba to change its political system, stop being communists that don't work, and if you want to be communist, then be communists that do work. Look at China and look at Vietnam. And then secondly, to reestablish your economy, make it a market economy. And thus far, Cuba has been reacting to what President Trump has been doing, and they've been making a lot of changes. They haven't been implementing a lot of them, but they're making a lot of them. So Iran is going to watch that. Iran's going to watch what's happened with Russia. Iran's going to watch North Korea, China, and they're going to look and say, okay, how did everybody handle not only Donald Trump second term, but Donald Trump first term, other sanctions regimes, and in the end, I'm not confident that he's going to get buy-in from, let's say, all 7 countries, and then the added 9, so 16. And even if they do buy in publicly, we're with you, Mr. President, we support you, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Privately, it's going to be business as usual for a lot of these countries. So, and the White House knows that there's going to be a public position and then a private position. And lastly here, oil is probably going to go up. And then you have the other group, which is the European Union member countries and other countries on the African continent, in Asia. And increasing prices of oil are going to hurt them. And so how much pain are they willing to accept so the White House can prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon? And we're going to watch that unfold, but I do not think it's going to go quickly.
Thank you. That was John Kavulik, Senior Editor at Issue Insights, joining us from New York. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
All right, coming up, Armenia's government approves its development plan for the next 5 years. We'll have the details. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Prime Time. Now, the Armenian government has approved its development program for the next 5 years. The document includes concrete plans for signing a peace agreement with Azerbaijan, delimiting the border, and developing transport links. At the same time, Yerevan plans to modernize its armed forces and strengthen its military capabilities in the coming years.
Armenia's new 5-year development program places particular emphasis on relations with Azerbaijan. The document says work will continue towards signing and ratifying a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as the delimitation and demarcation of the state border. It also plans to expand ties between the two countries' civil societies and business communities, as well as bilateral trade. Regional transport projects are also highlighted in the program. Armenia plans to implement the Crossroads of Peace initiative and rebuild the Gyumri-Akurik and Yeresk-Sadarak railway sections. The document also calls for greater dialogue with Azerbaijan and Türkiye in the energy sector. At the same time, the Armenian government has identified the development of its armed forces as another priority for the next 5 years. The program calls for continued efforts to transition to a professional army, increase the number of military personnel, and strengthen the armed forces' supply of weapons, military equipment, and other resources. It also envisages the digital transformation of the military command and control system, aligning military education institutions with Western standards and expanding domestic military production. In foreign policy, Armenia plans to deepen its strategic partnerships with the European Union and the United States, while transforming its relationship with Russia in line with a new foreign policy context. The program also includes plans to draft a new constitution and put it to a referendum. Overall, the document shows that Armenia plans to pursue peace and regional integration with Azerbaijan while simultaneously strengthening its defense capabilities over the next 5 years.
All right, joining us now is Farid Shafiev, chairman of the Center of Analysis of International Relations, joining us from Baku. Good to have you, sir.
Good evening.
All right, now, when you look at this 5-year plan as a whole, what stands out to you about the Armenia Pashinyan wants to build?
Basically, as it was outlined just in the overview which we've heard, it is about the new country, about the so-called Fourth Republic. Pashinyan just yesterday made extensive comments about this concept of the new real Armenia versus mythical Armenia. So along with that, the concept, the major concept, that the government adopted the program as it was previously referred. One of the main ideas is peace in the region, and we have in the part of this government program which speaks about delimitation, the peace process, and the transport corridors. And regarding these transport routes, we have 3 pieces in this program. It's the TRIP, Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. We have the opening or the construction of the segment of the railroad towards Turkey. And also important is the construction of the railroad towards the Sadarak. So that means the connection between Yerevan and Nakhchivan, and when we have TRIP, and when we have the road to Turkey. So that's the idea of Armenia to become to go into network, to become element of the network of transportation network in the region. And it's possible indeed, or became possible after peace process with Azerbaijan. As it was also outlined, we see quite interesting several other elements. For example, deepening cooperation with European Union, with United States, with China, with Iran. But when it comes to Russia, the program speaks about transformation. So we see these differences, the contrast, deepening cooperation with regional countries, with the global actors. But when it comes to Russia, it's about transformation, about new sort of relationship. Also, more favorably the program speaks about the cooperation with European Union. When it comes to Eurasian Economic Union, the program speaks about the benefits, to make the rules and engagement within this organization more clear. What it means that Armenia indeed in the process of reconsideration of its relationship with Russia and Eurasian Economic Union, and we see generally more favorable attitude towards the regional countries, right, including Azerbaijan and Turkey, and the actors, Western actors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, I want to get your thoughts on this. Peace with Azerbaijan is at the heart of the plan. What would a settled relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan allow Yerevan to do that it cannot do today?
Well, I think we have to look again back to come to the major concept of the historical Armenia. That's the necessity, because in the past Armenia had historical claims and territorial claims towards its neighbors. So once this issue will be resolved through the change of constitution, which, by the way, the program does not speak. Probably, I would say the important omission of this in this program, it doesn't speak about the new constitution, but the Pashinyan spoke about that yesterday, generally alluding that the Armenia is going to change constitution to make it in line with the concept of the real Armenia. So the peace and and the architecture of this peace is Azerbaijan allows Armenia now to speak about regional engagement and cooperation.
Sir, Armenia also wants a bigger and better equipped army. What does that tell us about how Yerevan sees its security needs, even with the peace process moving forward?
Yeah, well, every country is entitled to defense and security, and probably it shouldn't be surprising that Armenia, after defeating the Second Karabakh War, would like to upgrade its army. And we see in this program is a lot of parts of this program dedicated to the modernization of the army. But taking into account the tragic history, occupation, and aggression from the Republic of Armenia, Azerbaijan has legitimate concern to look at those parts and to have clear picture why and at what scale, what kind of weapons and what kind of modernization Armenia is going to perform. Because yes, right now it looks like very peaceful, looks like defensive, but we should look 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead. What kind of government will be in Armenia after Pashinyan? Whether they will use those modern weaponry against Azerbaijan. So that is indeed, I would say, those parts in the state program for 26-31, even for 4 years, is the concern for Azerbaijan.
Now, also Armenia wants deeper strategic ties with the EU and the United States. What does Yerevan need from them to make this new direction work?
Well, it's clear that Armenia would like to have, if before the major partner was Russia and Eurasian Economic Union, Armenia in the quest of new partnership, new opportunities. Whether in the short term, for these 4 years, Armenia will depart from Eurasian Economic Union and will move towards the European Union. It's unclear. I would say that expectation, if that expectation exists, it's, I would say, too high expectation. Rather than realistically still Armenia depends. But the program and this, the phraseology and narrative about deepening cooperation, it manifests the strategic choice to move towards more cooperation, more deeper and structural cooperation with the West, namely United States and European Union.
All right. Hello, sir. Are you still with us?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. That was Farid Shafiev, chairman of the Center of Analysis of International Relations, joining us from Baku. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you for the invitation.
All right. After the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still on to Prime Time. Now, Romania has destroyed a maritime drone armed with explosives after it was detected close to a major Black Sea gas project. 2 F-16 firefighter jets were scrambled after the UAV was spotted just a few hundred meters from the Neptune Deep development. Several hundred people were working on the site at the time. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where Romania destroyed an explosive-laden marine drone close to one of the EU's most important new energy projects. Romania scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets after the drone was spotted just 100 meters from the Neptune Deep gas project in the Black Sea. The site lies within Romania's exclusive economic zone, but outside its territorial waters, meaning an attack there would not automatically fall within NATO's collective defense provisions. Defense Minister Radu Mirutsa says the drone was hit by a fighter jet, then completely destroyed by a ship sent to the area. He later confirmed it was carrying explosives. Now, this is not an isolated incident. Earlier this month, Romanian military divers destroyed 2 other drones drifting near the project. And just days ago, 2 Spanish F-18 fighter jets shot down a drone that entered Romanian airspace, following 3 Russian drones shot down on 3 consecutive days in July. Romania has not identified where the latest drone came from, but Ukraine says it was not theirs, and the Romanian president blames Russia, condemning what he calls an intensification of irresponsible incidents by Moscow. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the latest incident is part of an escalating campaign of threats. Russia has not commented. The location also matters. Neptune Deep is expected to begin producing gas next year and could make Romania the EU's largest gas producer. Jointly owned by OMV Petrom and state-owned Romgaz, the project is an important part of Europe's efforts to strengthen its energy security. Mirutsa says Romania is on the front line of the EU's defense, facing threats not only from drones at sea and in the air, but also from floating mines in the Black Sea. Romania, Bulgaria, and Türkiye are working closely together to clear those mines, with more than 150 neutralized since the war in Ukraine started. For Romania and its NATO allies, the war is increasingly posing a threat not only to their airspace and waters, but also to critical energy infrastructure. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, Turkey's expanding role in Syria is fueling new tensions with Israel amid growing Israeli concern over Ankara's military cooperation with Damascus. The dispute has intensified following Israel's strike on a Syrian airbase that it claimed was about to host Turkish forces, an allegation denied by both Turkey and Syria. Adamor reports from Istanbul.
Turkey says it will continue supporting Syria's efforts to bolster its military capacity and rebuild its defense infrastructure, despite steadily mounting tensions with Israel over Ankara's role in the country. Speaking at a Thursday press briefing, a defense ministry spokesman said Turkish support would continue under what Ankara calls the One Army principle, which is aimed at strengthening Syrian state institutions, including its armed forces. The remarks came 2 days after Israeli warplanes struck the Abu al-Duhur military airbase in northwestern Syria near the Turkish border, damaging the runway and other facilities, but causing no reported casualties. Israel says the strike was carried out because Syria was preparing to allow Turkish forces to establish a presence at the base, a move that Israel views as a threat to its security. But the Turkish Defense Ministry rejected the claim, saying no Turkish military personnel had been present at the airbase either before or during the Israeli attack. Syria, too, has denied that any Turkish military buildup was planned at the facility. The incident has led to increasingly sharp exchanges between Turkey and Israel, with Ankara accusing Israel of violating Syria's sovereignty and undermining efforts to stabilize the country. Israel, for its part, has repeatedly warned against any expansion of Turkish military influence in Syria. The dispute comes as Turkey deepens cooperation with Syria's new leadership following the fall of President Bashar al-Assad in late 2024. Since Assad's departure, Ankara has been providing Syria with military training and technical support, while also expanding economic, trade, and energy ties with Damascus. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Google is expanding its presence in Pakistan with a new agreement covering technology and artificial intelligence. The move follows a series of new initiatives by the company in the country. Miriam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Pakistan and Google are broadening cooperation in artificial intelligence, digital skills, and technology exports. On Friday, the two sides signed an MOU at the Prime Minister's office in Islamabad. It covers digital skills, AI, digital commerce, and technology export. The agreement also includes to establish an AI Center of Excellence in Islamabad. It will train Pakistani youth and other human resources in skills aligned with global market requirements. The two sides will also explore AI for public services, agriculture, and the Federal Board of Revenue's digitalization project. Government described the cooperation as laying the foundation for a new era of digital transformation and innovation in Pakistan. The new agreement comes a day after Digital Passport initiative was launched. Google committed $500,000 to digital citizenship and AI safety programs. The initiative aims to reach 200,000 households with Urdu language safety tools, videos, and parental workshops. Google also opened its first Pakistan office in Karachi on Tuesday, nearly 4 years after it registered its presence in the country. Google plans to provide 150,000 career certificates in Pakistan this year. Students will also receive free access to advanced AI tools for 1 year. Pakistan wants its IT exports and digital economy to reach $30 billion by 2030. Google's expanding presence comes as artificial intelligence reshapes the global technology economy, with Pakistan seeking a larger role in digital services, skills, and technology exports. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Now, Central Asia is stepping up efforts to expand its transport links, with billions of dollars being invested in new railways, roads, and logistics hubs. The projects are also reshaping major trade routes between Asia and Europe, with Kazakhstan playing a central role. Our correspondent Farzeh Kalmaziner has more.
Kazakhstan has become the biggest investor in transport projects among Central Asian countries. It accounts for 45% of all regional investment in roads and railways, around $32 billion. That's according to a new report by the Eurasian Development Bank. Overall, Central Asian countries are investing almost $72 billion in transport projects. The biggest share goes to railways, more than 42%. But countries across the region are also building and upgrading roads, logistics centers, and border crossings. Kazakhstan's geography puts it right at the heart of many of these routes. Major transport links running through the country connect China with Russia and the South Caucasus, and that strengthens Kazakhstan's position as a key transit country between East and West. China remains the largest foreign investor in Central Asia's transport sector. According to the Eurasian Development Bank, Chinese investment exceeds $7 billion. And many of these projects are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And looking ahead, the Eurasian Development Bank says these routes could become much better connected by 2035. And with its location, level of investment, and growing transit role, Kazakhstan is expected to remain a key part of that development. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Now, Kyrgyzstan, China, and Russia are now Georgia's leading export markets, according to the latest trade figures. The data also points to Tbilisi's growing importance along the Middle Corridor. Nina Nikolashvili reports on Tbilisi.
The headline number: Kyrgyzstan is now Georgia's largest single export market at $521 million, ahead of China and Russia. That's not random. It reflects the Middle Corridor, the route moving goods from Central Asia and China through Georgia and the South Caucasus toward Europe, bypassing both Russia and Iran. As global trade reroutes around sanctions and instability, Georgia is positioning itself as a transit and re-export hub. And these expert figures suggest that strategy is gaining real traction. But the same data holds a harder story. Russia is Georgia's third largest export destination and second largest trading partner overall, with turnover of $1.8 billion. That's substantial economic cooperation with a country Georgia has had no formal diplomatic ties with since 2008. And it comes as Tbilisi's relationship with the EU and US remains strained over democratic backsliding concerns and Georgia's own geopolitical alignment. Beyond partners, overall trade turnover climbed to $15.5 billion, up 7.5%, driven largely by a 21.6% jump in exports. Cars and oil products dominate trade in both directions. Together, the figures paint a picture of a country economically pulled in multiple directions at once, chasing middle corridor opportunity while staying commercially close to Russia. The trade numbers, in that sense, tell a foreign policy story as much as an economic one. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Now, Uzbekistan and Georgia have introduced an electronic permit system for international road freight, replacing paper documents with digital permits. The move is expected to speed up procedures and make cross-border transport more transparent, with more than 60% of Uzbek road carriers currently using routes through Georgia. Severa Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Uzbekistan and Georgia have launched the e-permit system for international road freight. The system will allow carriers to receive transport permits electronically instead of using paper documents. It covers bilateral and transit transportation, as well as shipments to and from third countries. Uzbekistan's transport ministry says the digital system will reduce paperwork and the human factor, while helping prevent delays in the permit process. The change is particularly significant for Uzbek carriers, with over 60% of the country's road transport companies currently operating through Georgia. The electronic exchange of permits is expected to save time and provide carriers with a more transparent and convenient system. The agreement to introduce e-permit was signed during President Shavkat Mirziyoyev's visit to Georgia in early July. The two countries also agreed to expand discounts on rail freight and develop logistics infrastructure at Georgian seaports. The goal is to make the transport routes through Georgia more efficient and strengthen Uzbekistan's access to international trade corridors. Cyril Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
All right, after the break, we'll take a look at other top stories making the headlines today. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Prime Time. Some leading European nations, along with Canada, have condemned plans by Israel to start a major new construction project on the West Bank. Palestinians have argued that the E1 housing development will cut the West Bank into two, isolating East Jerusalem.
Israel's plans to open tenders for about 1,200 settlement homes in the strategically important E1 area of the occupied West Bank have drawn fresh condemnation from major Western powers. The UK, France, Germany, Italy and Canada called the decision unacceptable and urged Israel to withdraw the plans immediately. The 5 countries said the move could further undermine hopes for a two-state solution. E1 lies east of Jerusalem, and Palestinians and many of Israel's allies have warned that construction there could effectively cut the West Bank in two and isolate East Jerusalem. US Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee has warned Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank not to take property owned by Palestinian Americans.
And I think if we're going to be true to faith, true to heritage, then you recognize that if you don't own something, you don't take it and you don't desire it. So if someone owns the land and they own their house, then having someone come and take it over and scare the family away from it, that's a violation not just of man's law, that's a violation of God's law, and it should be called out as such.
The United Nations has also warned that the plan poses an existential threat to the territorial continuity of a future Palestinian state. In Gaza, the UN says Palestinian civilians, including children, continue to be killed and injured in Israeli airstrikes. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said the bodies of 50 people, including 19 children, killed more than 2 years ago, were recently recovered from the rubble and buried.
Our colleagues at the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs continue to receive reports of Palestinian civilians in Gaza being killed, being injured, or otherwise impacted by Israeli airstrikes, by shelling and gunfire. This includes children, as one can imagine, given the overcrowded conditions in the Gaza Strip. We continue to call for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. Civilians should never be targeted or used for military purposes.
The UN says recovery work is being slowed by restrictions on machinery and supplies, while 94% of Gaza's 2.1 million people need shelter and basic assistance.
At least 16 people have been killed and dozens injured in a Russian overnight air assault on Kyiv and surrounding areas. Ukraine says civilian sites were also hit. It's calling for stronger air defenses, but Moscow says it targeted military facilities only.
A day of mourning has been declared for Friday in Ukraine after at least a dozen people were killed in a large-scale Russian missile and drone attack overnight in Kyiv and the surrounding area. That's according to the capital's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko. Officials say more than 40 others were injured. Ukrainian authorities said the strikes damaged apartment buildings, warehouses, a school and a children's hospital across several districts of the capital. The country's air force said Russia launched dozens of hypersonic missiles, including ballistic and 168 drones. Officials said many were intercepted, but ballistic ones remained a major challenge. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has renewed calls for Western allies to provide more air defense missiles, particularly Patriot interceptors, saying shortages are leaving the capital vulnerable to ballistic attacks. Russia's defense ministry said the latest strikes targeted military facilities, including sites producing drone components, a military depot and a logistics hub. Separately, Russia and Ukraine exchanged 103 prisoners each in a United Arab Emirates-mediated swap, with the released Russian servicemen transferred to Belarus for medical assistance.
Meanwhile, at least 2 people have been killed and 2 others injured in a Russian drone attack on Ukraine's Kharkiv region. The overnight strike hit the village of Labez, where 5 homes and several cars were damaged and fires broke out. Rescuers recovered the bodies of 2 women from the rubble. Russian strikes also hit the Sumy region, causing fires, damage to residential areas and further injuries. Now, the fallout from the mass migrant crossing into Spanish enclave of Ceuta last month is influencing Europe's forthcoming partnership agreement with Morocco. Brussels is now reportedly preparing more support for border management as it seeks to conclude the deal by the end of the year.
The Ceuta crisis has strengthened Morocco's hand in its negotiations with the European Union. According to Euronews, Brussels is preparing to increase resources for security, migration and border management as it works towards a new strategic partnership with Rabat. EU officials reportedly denied that the Ceuta crisis accelerated negotiations. They say the agreement, which is largely about migration, was already expected by the end of this year. But they acknowledge migration surge has prompted Brussels to increase resources dedicated to border and migration management. A European Commission spokesperson told Euronews that the EU committed €222 million for migration management in Morocco between 2021 and 2024, with another €190 million foreseen through 2027. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has also called for tighter checks, physical barriers and improved technical and financial support for Morocco. The Ceuta crisis came after more than 72,000 people crossed into the Spanish enclave irregularly at the end of July. Dozens of people were killed. Meanwhile, Spain is building temporary accommodation in Ceuta, with 4 sites planned to provide space for up to 1,500 people as existing reception centres struggle with overcrowding.
Now, the Trump administration has sent the first group of deportees to Liberia under a deal allowing Washington to transfer up to 1,200 people to the West African state over the next year. Liberia's information minister said most of those deported are from Latin American countries, including Venezuela, Cuba, and Colombia. The arrangement is part of the Trump administration's efforts to speed up deportations by sending some people to third countries. The UN Refugee Agency and migration officials are helping provide support for the operation, which Washington has defended as lawful. An international conference is underway in Baku, focusing on Belgium's colonial legacy in Central Africa and calls for reparations and historical justice. Chimnaz Shakla reports from the venue.
Colonialism is once again in the spotlight in Baku as an international conference on Belgium's colonial legacy and the fight for reparation is currently underway. Belgium's colonial rule left a deep and lasting impact on Central Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo was under Belgian colonial rule for around 75 years, while Rwanda and Burundi were also administered by Belgium during the colonial periods. Today, decades after independence, questions of historical responsibility, recognition and reparative justice remain part of international discussions. Organized by the Baku Initiative Group, the conference brings together officials and experts from Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Morocco and South Africa, as well as representatives from the United Nations. The focus is on Belgium's historical responsibility for the crimes committed during the colonial era, with participants discussing calls for an official apology, reparation and the restitution of cultural heritage. The conference is also addressing demand for greater access to Belgium's colonial archives, the return of human remains and historical artifacts, and the establishment of international mechanism to ensure reparations. Discussions are continuing here in Baku, with participants calling for historical justice and concrete steps toward addressing the legacy of Belgian colonial rule. I'm Chimnaz Shahlar with Zehrab Shirinov for A News.
All right, it's been a pleasure bringing you Primetime tonight. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.